Hello, welcome to the Rightest Leftist with Nathan Ogilvie. Today we're going to be covering a very non-controversial topic, the Victorian Labor Government, and I'll be grading them on a letter scale in how they've done as a government so far, because we're 1 year out from the Victorian State Election. I'm hoping, given the non-controversial nature of this topic, that we'll have a perfectly calm and rational comment section. So we'll see how that goes. What I'd like to say first is my last video is by far now my highest viewed video, with over 3 times the views of the second highest video. So welcome any new viewers that are coming in. Especially welcome to my new Gen Z audience. I'm not afraid to show, here's my stats there. This was my Gen Z audience before. I literally had 0% of 18 to 24 year olds and only 6.3 25 to 34 year olds in my audience. So welcome on board. I'm actually, as you might see here, declaring myself the commander-in-chief of the Gen Z army. And my commitment to you, if you're a Gen Zer viewing this, is that I'll fight tirelessly for you to get that job and that house and live that Australian dream that your parents lived. And me in the millennial generation, I think we can form this Gen Z millennial alliance and fight back. So this narrative of never being able to afford a home and the struggle of the jobs, as I'm learning more and more, is actually by design from the ultra wealthy and the elites to take all the wealth away. And as if we unite and form that alliance, we can definitely fight back. I can't promise that I'll deliver, but I will do everything I can. And that's not to exclude Gen Z and boomers. A lot of you get it and are with it and want the younger generations to have that better life. And it's certainly possible. There's so many ways that, and the more and more I'm learning how rigged it is, how easily it can be unrigged too, if we get the politicians and the political will to be able to make those changes. And that's what this whole channel's about. That's everything that I'm fighting for. So welcome on board, the new Gen Z audience. All it took was me to mention Gen Z about 100 times in my last video. It must have tripped the algorithm switch somehow and pushed it out to you all. So thanks for coming on board. I also been told that apparently people pronounce it Gen Z. I know in Australia we call it Z, not Z, but I'm not going to change that. I like Gen Z. It sounds so much better. So if that's a deal breaker for you, I'm really sorry to lose you as a viewer. All right, let's get straight into it because we have a lot to cover. The Victorian Labor Government, headed up currently by Jacinta Allen, as you can see there, our Premier, and previously Daniel Andrews, who was the Premier from 2014 when they got elected all the way through to 2023 when he resigned. Let's have a look at the overview of Labor, because I'm going to say it now, and of course, obviously, everything in this video is my opinion, but I think Labor has had a very mixed bag in terms of their performance and policies. So just the basic facts. They've been in power since 2014 election, which is actually for Australia and Victoria before Netflix came, which arrived early in 2015. So this government's been around before we've even had Netflix as a sort of a measure there. Interesting. It's been led, as I said, by Daniel Andrews and Jacinta Allen as the premiers. In terms of the election performance, so my goal for this video is to look at the strengths and the weaknesses of the Labor government and offer my opinion on what I think they are, and then to provide a prediction on how I think the election is going to go. But I recognise there are Labor being a very polarising government, meaning it has a lot of haters and also a strong support base, that my intention is for people to examine their own bias. And if you hate Labor, maybe consider some of their strengths, or if you love the Victorian Labor, consider some of their weaknesses, and we can sort of do a bit of a nuanced take. But I recognise I'll probably just end up annoying everybody, but that's okay. I won't change my opinion because of that. But if you're a hater of Labor, it is important to recognise how strongly they've performed in the election. So in 2014, they got in. So FP means first preference. So you can see that number there is how much percentage of the vote they got just on their own. So that's how many people directly voted for Labor. And then in Australia, with our preferential voting, I got corrected in my last video that we don't call it ranked choice voting here. Some people feel strongly about that. What happens is the lower candidates, so if you get the least amount of votes, your vote then goes to the second person that person put on their ballot. So we rank all of our candidates by 1 through to however many there are, let's say 1 through to 6. And so if number 6 gets the least amount of votes, their vote will then go to on that card who voted for them next. So kind of that's where the Greens votes often flow to Labor, and then the One Nation and those other right-wing parties' votes often go to the Liberals. Not all the time. It depends, and independents can be interesting as well. But that's how you get that TPP, which ends up becoming what they call the two-party preferred, and that would be often between Liberal and Labor. Sometimes it's TCP, which is two candidate preferred if it's an independent who gets in the top 2 candidates. But overall, when we're talking about statewide, it's TPP. And so Labor, when they first got elected, got basically 52% TPP, and they got 47 seats in the lower house. There is the upper house too, but I'm more focused. Care more about the lower house. It's a good indicator of that amount of seats. Sort of shows how well they did in overall, and you can see the rise and fall in terms of how they performed. 2018, they actually did even better, to the surprise of many, at 42 first preference, and then 57.3 two-party preferred, so almost 60%. Overall, it was a real, the Vic Liberal Party really did bad that election, and Labor increased to 55 seats. And then 2022, they went backwards, but that was after the COVID era when there was a lot of community anger at Vic Labor, and we'd just been through some of the longest lockdowns in the world. They did pretty well, and they got 55% TPP. So their first preference vote went down, but because of the way the preferences worked, they did go down in the TPP, but not by that much. And again, uniquely, and this is sort of where the votes are located, because the percentage doesn't tell you much, but because it's broken down by getting seats in the electorates, they actually increased a seat. And so sort of, again, against all odds, despite all the criticism and community anger, did even better in terms of seats. 2026, who knows what is going to happen? It's less than a year away now. The date is set for November 28th. And I'm going to be closely following Victorian Labor and their policies because, in my opinion, they're a mixed bag. At best. So we're going to have a look at some of the 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses. 2 of them I couldn't really even tip them towards a strength or a weakness, so there's kind of 2 mixed in between there. And then what I'm going to do is provide the overall grade, how I think Vic Labor have been doing, and then a prediction for the outcome of the election in 2026. So a lot of stuff. I think first of all, so the way I'm going to order it is I'm going to go from their sort of their strongest strength all the way to their weakest weakness. So you can click, there'll be those little timestamps. You can click if you don't want to look at them all, if you're just a Labor hater and you don't want to see the good that I think Labor have done, or you're a Labor lover, you don't want to see the bad that they've done, skip around to the content you want to see. But if you're a person that likes a balanced approach and looking at the good and bad, watch the whole video and give me that sweet watch time so I can feed my family. Thank you. So Victoria's big build is kind of the overall name for the infrastructure plan that they've implemented since 2014. And these are 4 of the most, I would say, successful projects in terms of delivery. A couple of them are close to delivery and have sort of semi-opened up, like the Westgate Tunnel. The level crossing removal has had now, I think, 88 level crossings removed, with another close to 40 to 50 to go. And the North East Link is well on the way to completion. And why do I think that Victoria's infrastructure is their greatest strength? I think because infrastructure is something that is so tangible and visible, and actually helps everyday people, because The biggest one, I think the one we got to point to the most, that level crossing removal has hugely impacted those areas where there were level crossings. Now, level crossing, if you're not in an area with a train station, it's basically where the train tracks cross over the road, and it can cause huge delays, especially at peak hour times or school times, where the cars just have to stop if a train's coming through. And often what happens is 2 trains will come through, so you can be waiting up to 20 minutes or even in some cases half an hour, even more than half an hour, just to cross a road. And they were met initially with some community pushback, especially there was one that called the Sky Rail that went along a certain area of tracks, and the local community were pretty upset because they thought what was going to happen was it would lower their property value with the train being raised above the tracks. Long story short, what happened was it opened up when they put the train up and they had these really nice barriers. It actually created all these green spaces, cycling tracks, playgrounds, car spaces, all these things they could add to the land underneath the Sky Rail that actually ended up increasing the values of those properties, and the communities completely turned around and are fully in support of those level crossing projects. And similarly with the tunnels and the Northeast Link, the suburban rail loop is a bit more controversial because of the extreme cost of it. But overall, they cause a little bit of disruption, these projects, and the community get a little bit upset. But when they are finally delivered, people just sort of accept them as a part of life and overall as a benefit to society. So again, not perfect. Most of these projects have had cost and time blowouts, which has increased the debt that Victoria is in and harm the budget. So they're not perfect. A big one, and Daniel Andrews, people hate him for, a lot of people who do hate him is more for the COVID era, but people do forget his first big controversy was the cancellation of the East-West link in 2014 that cost about $1.1 billion in a cancelled contract with nothing to show for it. Again, Labor's argument was that the cost blowouts would have been even more and it wasn't a good return on investment to have built. We'll leave it's dead now, so we leave that conversation there. But my overall grade for Labor on infrastructure is a B+. So I think because of the cost and time blowouts, it's not enough to give them an A or higher than that. But I think a B+ as the infrastructure being their greatest strength is a fair score. Second greatest strength for Labor, and something that Labor is known to perform well on, is through education. They've always been seen, and if we look at, which I'm going to do in another video, what Labor's most trusted to handle education is up there. You can't understate how the free kinder and TAFE programs were a game changer for the state of Victoria. Free kinder for parents to be able to contribute to the workforce, having the kinder funded is amazing, and that the universal programs are widely popular, and Labor implementing that in kindergarten has been great. There's talk of extending it to all childcare through to babies, which would be amazing too. Again, there's always pushback from people that don't have children, or older people who are grandparents now and aren't working parents. But as a working parent myself, and I think community-wide, there's a huge benefit from that. Free TAFE as well has helped upskill many people in the state and has helped keep us competitive, and has had huge positive impacts in certain industries where those free TAFE programs apply, because you can't just get all programs free in TAFE. It's certain industries that need it. Like construction, there's some sort of accounting and technical skill ones. So the free TAFE has been hugely helpful to increase the skills for Victorians. Again, there's been some issues with a lot of the education policies that Victorian government wanted to include were around inclusion. And there's a lot of work to be done. School refusal is a huge problem. And then a lot of disadvantaged communities still, there's huge gaps in educational outcomes. Indigenous communities, regional communities in Victoria, and also just struggling families that have issues with school refusal, and that Labor have, I would think it's fair to say, tried to address it, but the outcomes that I've seen, and again, we're going to be doing deep dives into each of these policies, so this is just broad overviews. There's a lot to be done there, and Labor, they talk about it, but the outcomes haven't really been there for all of that. So it's kind of, again, some target areas of education they've done really well, like the kindergarten and TAFE, but it's particularly around high school and school refusal, a big issue. And so overall, I'm going to grade them a B on education. Now, This one I had as a strength originally, but I've moved it to mixed just because of when I was starting to read the actual outcomes. I was like, oh, I don't know if I can put this as a strength. So healthcare. Another thing Labor is often seen as handling better out of all the parties, especially federal Labor. Healthcare is like their highest rated specific issue that they're good at handling. And a big one, and this sort of ties into the infrastructure, and where, again, I would say Labor do really well, is investment in hospitals. So they're working on a redevelopment of the Melton Hospital. I didn't change the text there. So there's other hospitals. There's the Clayton Heart Hospital so Heart Hospital in Clayton, and a few other hospitals are in the middle of upgrades as well. So in terms of investment in hospitals, Labor have done really well, and a lot of those hospitals have improved their services. One of the big weaknesses in healthcare, though, and it's so big that that's what's maybe not able to call it a strength, is in staffing. There's constant ongoing issues with staff burnout and pay issues with staff. This also applies to, the police and firefighters too. There's been ongoing pay disputes, and those are all state-funded organizations. That as the Labor government who's supposed to be pro-worker, it's very disappointing how a lot of them have been treated, because I have friends and family members who are on those frontline workers, and they've been treated terribly, and they shouldn't have to be fighting, and the union shouldn't have to be pushing so much against a Labor government that's supposed to be pro-union. Ramping is a specific issue in healthcare with ambulance wait times, where workers they basically just leave the ambulance there at the hospital while they have to wait for that person that they're with to be seen, which stops the ambulances being able to get back out and help other people, which has blown out wait times. Very long and complicated issue that I will cover later, but also the lack of investment in mental health support. And that's mental health support for the community as well as the workers within the healthcare industry itself. And it's as a psychologist, my most passionate issue is mental health support and funding. And look, Labor have spoken a lot about it. They have specific mental health funding targets in their policies. But I very disappointed at the lack of mental health support funding, because they fund often the public services, which have a lot of issues. They're kind of those walk-in ones, so people can come in for free, but their quality and their outcomes, they don't really report that. And you can then maybe ask yourself, why don't we get to see the numbers on how those are actually delivering? And I would love to see that. And if again, I'm trying to have a couple of Labor politicians on, maybe some journalists too, but these are community mental health centres, and also just the mental health and wellbeing support for healthcare staff is pretty woeful and underfunded, and something that I would really love to see Labor focus on. They could quite easily move this into a strength for me if they've really focused on that. We are in a mental health crisis in Australia and Victoria, and that's a big part of what's leading to crime and things like that. The other issues that we're talking about, Labor's supposedly, I keep getting told, the party for everyday Aussies. So they need to show that. And that's why I've given them an overall grade of a C+ for their investment in hospitals and infrastructure around healthcare. But the actual on-the-ground funding for a lot of these programs and support for staff is not there. Another mixed one. This one was going to be a weakness, and I guess you could make the argument that it is one of their weaknesses. You can see I'll just skip to the grade first. I've given it a D+. I guess, you could say that is a weakness. Maybe I'm being too kind. So you're welcome, Jacinta, if you ever watch this video, which you probably won't. But yeah, in seriousness though, the cost of living is by far the number one issue on everyday Aussies' minds. And Victoria is no different. All the surveys I've seen for the issues, when people have to rank the issues or what issue is most important to you, cost of living is by far the most important issue, because it's not just like when I say, if you've gone back and watched my intro video about Australia not being what it was in the 90s or the early 2000s, of course people struggled with the cost of living back then. But now it's even sort of the middle class, the hardworking Aussies, white collar Aussies, and that's where I've got the sky blue. It's the mix of the blue and the white collar workers are all struggling now. So you can be on about $100,000 a year and still be struggling with the cost of living. So the cost of living is creeping up on everyone. And we know why, because when the ultra wealthy are sucking up all the wealth and all of those, and the way the system's rigged, those are the bigger issues we can change. But in terms of what Vic Labor has done, their cost of living measures are good, some of them. But if you look here, this is the whole thing I'm frustrated with, is what I call peanuts, that it's just a little bit of a once-off payment, or just a little peanut here to shut you up. And then they can say they look good with the cost of living, but it's not addressing the key issue. So they have a $100 power saving bonus, some of those universal programs, which are great, which help alleviate the costs for working families or people studying. And then also we do have to factor in those indirect savings through the infrastructure. Like when a level crossing gets removed from a community, people will save money on time and petrol and things like that. So maybe not a direct payment from the government, but improving the infrastructure does help alleviate the cost of living in some ways. But then again, counterpoint, I can already hear the right wingers screeching at me, so I'll just get on it early. The high taxes can be a cost of that. And Victoria does have some of the highest state taxes in Australia. And those are through things like the land tax, I know that personally, payroll tax, and things like stamp duty when you purchase a house. And a lot of those taxes are what the Liberal Party is targeting for their cost of living measures. And it does resonate with a portion of the community that feel like the taxes are way too high and affecting the cost of living. Again, what my frustration more so is that the cost of living measures are more peanuts and not really long-term sustainable structural changes that will actually help everyday Aussies with the costs. And that it's just that whether it's permanently reducing prices or ongoing relief, I don't really see them. They definitely haven't delivered on stuff like that necessarily, and I don't hear them really talk about that too much. And if cost of living is the number one issue, they're going to have to turn that around. So overall, a D plus for cost of living. To be fair, here's a list. You can pause the video and read it yourself. These are some of the things that the Labor government have either promised. At this point, a lot of them are promises, other things are delivery. So some of them are really essential things. Like if you can see that 18 million in food relief to the hardest struggling Aussies. And the power saving bonus is really good for concession card holders, and the free kinder and the public transport for kids under 18, things like that. A lot of it is really good. So I don't want to discredit Labor. So maybe that's where we could maybe give it a move up from a D plus to a C. But because it's such an issue that's biting and stinging everybody, families everywhere, Labor could really do so much better. Onto their weaknesses, and I will just say both of the weaknesses, I've graded the Vic Labor government an F, but I see the next one that we're going to talk about as their lowest weakness. So this is their second worst weakness is community safety. And the numbers can't lie. And, I'm a left-wing guy. I'm the rightest leftist, but we are in the middle of a crime wave in Victoria. So my super lefty Greens friends, you can't be denying the fact that crime is... and certain crimes in particular are on the increase. So carjackings, aggravated burglary, knife and machete crimes are all escalating to completely unacceptable levels in the community. Labor in particular have flip-flopped on their bail laws. The machete bins, which apparently cost $1 million each, don't seem to have been that effective because it doesn't really seem to have reduced the crime. The amnesty is actually over now, so there'll be harsher penalties, and so we'll see how that plays out. But my opinion is we need to be doing more, and the Vic Labor aren't paying me to be a consultant, so they may not take this advice, but it much more needs to be linked to the cost of living crisis. We know that poverty breeds crime, and parents and families are struggling. And as a parent myself, who's doing fairly well, I guess, financially, a lot of families are struggling just to survive and put food on the table. So many parents are working 2 or 3 jobs. And yes, look, they made the choice to be parents, so you could say that they need to parent better and do that. But when children teenagers, we're tribal animals and we want that sense of community and sense of belonging. And if they get that in gangs or with antisocial peers, this is a very complicated issue, especially the youth crime, that the community really we need to come together and address it. That early intervention is just as important as the punitive laws around bail. Because if you lock up a kid who's 15 and he's committed a crime, what kind of people do you think he's associating with in prison? It's not like putting him in the corner, he's going to think about what he did and come out a reformed individual. There are certainly programs that help with that, which are underfunded, but this kind of just lock everybody up approach we know doesn't work, because there's a thing called recidivism, which is the rate that people commit crimes. If someone commits a crime and then they go, after they've been released and they go back, that's called recidivism. Those rates are really high because if we're not providing that support to people as well, to get them back into the community, they're just going to commit the crime and go back to jail. So if we actually want to reduce crime, we have to look at what works and have a bigger conversation about that. And the resistance seems to be, funding those programs in some ways, yes, is expensive, but also can be seen as rewarding. Those individuals. We need to have a big talk about that. And I've got a long youth crime video upcoming, so stay tuned. Subscribe, and you'll see that when it comes out. I'd also like to address two underreported crime waves, which you rarely hear about, that are going on in Victoria, is the childcare scandal. The monster pedophiles in the system that have... as a parent myself with a 2-year-old daughter in childcare, is just a horrible, disgusting, outrageous thing to have happened. And look, the Victorian government did react and put in place some policies, but as far as I know, they haven't even got a head child safety commissioner in terms of for childcare yet. So they've been reactionary, but they haven't done enough. And that issue alone is enough for me to never vote for the Vic Labor government ever again. At all. And also the white collar crime. We barely hear about it. What about all these, like the bankers and and I know a lot of this is more federal crimes, of course, but we never hear about the white collar crime of, the scammers and all and also under that, the underworld and the firebombings that have been happening, especially against the Jewish communities, synagogues, and I think Josh Burns, politician, whose Jewish politician office got attacked. All of those crimes as well. You hear about it a little bit, but it's not just the youth crime. I know it's easy to, we're kind of a punch down society in some ways, more so the right wing, but there is a couple of undercurrent crime waves that we don't really hear about, and I'm going to be talking much more about those too, so we make sure we put the focus where it belongs. And look, again, I think I do agree with my right-wing friends that the Victorian government has failed in these areas, and if that's what you want to vote on, I could see why you would not vote for Vic Labor on that. It is a pretty big failure, the way they've handled community safety. But to me, the biggest weakness from the Victorian Labor government is their tone and their style. So I do recognise that you could argue that because it's not a policy issue that it maybe isn't that important. But the way I would describe it is they've taken a very authoritarian and condescending tone to the public. And I think that's very off-putting to voters. We do need to cover the COVID era. We can't avoid that. Victorian Labor was in power through the whole era, and they made a lot of errors, pun intended. They did make a lot of mistakes, and I think their condescending tone didn't help when the advice had to change, because obviously when you have a virus that's moving so quickly and the numbers and the data and the danger of it is changing daily, the information we're getting, coming in with this is the way we're doing it now and we won't hear any different approach, doesn't lead to that community trust. And especially when it came to encouraging people to take the vaccine and masks, the punitive way that they did it left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And we have to acknowledge that. This is a message more to my probably left-wing friends or the Labor-loving people. And I'm going to condescend to you, ironically. We have to acknowledge that there is that lingering anger in the community about it. And unfortunately, Jacinta Allen seems to have doubled down on that approach. I haven't done any videos of the question time in the Vic Parliament, but that style doesn't seem to have changed at all. Talking to the Victorians as adults and respecting their autonomy and working with them, because obviously in a pandemic, I know Labor's argument we had to make tough choices and we had to balance businesses' interests with health interests. Sure, that's totally valid, but the way they handled it, I think, was very, very poor. And if they'd had that slight change in style, they probably could have kept that community trust through the COVID era and come out the other side even stronger. We do acknowledge, though, that they did increase their vote after the COVID era, and I think we're going to talk about that now. I've also got a personal story to share. This was before COVID, but I can talk to you about the Labor tone and style through a story that I experienced. Again, overall grade an F. So let's just cover the COVID era. So we've ticked that box. Victoria was the most locked down. I didn't put state there because it doesn't make sense for the whole world, but we were, in terms of a region in the world, one of the most locked down places. We were in lockdown for 262 days total, and I went through and I've listed there the 6 lockdowns that we went through. Now, my personal view on this, again, look, the magic is we can all have our own personal views and disagree. It's totally fine. So if you have a different opinion to me, you're allowed to have that. Don't get stressed. I was in favor of the 2020 lockdowns. It sounded like COVID was going to be this really deadly virus that was going to kill a lot of people. I ask if they remember this. There was an article really early on before the first lockdown that Jeff's Shed, which is part of our Melbourne Convention Exhibition Centre, which is a huge building, was going to be turned into a mass morgue because of all the deaths. So yes, everyone panicked at that time. We could say governments overreacted and went much more to the safety route, but those lockdowns, I think, were totally valid and justified with the information at the time. When we get to the 2021 lockdowns, though, I flip much more to the anti-authoritarian, anti-Daniel Andrews crowd. And in particular, that lockdown number 6 was a brutal one for me. I had a bit of a breakdown myself in August that year. I recall it because I had to take some time off work because of it. I actually worked, was doing my training at the time, and I worked as a family therapist in a program where we'd go out to people's homes. So I was an essential worker, and I was actually I had an exemption, so I was able to go out to people's homes, and I saw families who struggled through these lockdowns and provided them support. So I have, I know everyone who lived in Victoria went through it, but I have an intimate knowledge of how different people coped with it in different ways. And my birthday is also at the end of October. So if you see there, the lockdown 2 and lockdown 6, the longest lockdowns, my birthday was in the week after they ended. And it was a celebration. It was a weird celebration because it was like meeting. I remember the 2021, it was like seeing all my friends for the first time because we've been locked down so much. We were just, it was a life-changing experience for so many Victorians. And I don't know how people, if you are a Victorian viewing that, how you feel remembering, man, we were locked down for such a long time. And in my opinion, that lockdown 6 was totally unnecessary. And that soured me more so to the Victorian Labor Government than I already was. They had my goodwill in 2020, but they burned it up with that last lockdown because I don't know the justification, because at that point vaccines were, they were in the midst of being rolled out, or they're already on the way out. But I think at that point it was just to keep the stats down to a super low amount. And I think that lockdown, I don't know how everyone else feels. Just leave a comment. Where did Labor lose you in the lockdowns, or did you think they were all justified and you continue to support them? Because the truth is, as you can see there, Labor did win in 2022. They did lose a bit of first preference support. So in the preferential voting, they went down from over 40% down to about 37%. So people did stop directly voting for them, but they still got a lot of support, and they did win in 2022. So a lot of people do feel that they guided us through that pandemic. And look, to be fair, to Vic Labor, very minimal deaths as well. So if the measurement was keeping people safe health-wise and avoiding COVID-related deaths, all the business and mental health costs that came along the costs of getting that. A lot of people think it wasn't worth it, but the Victorian people spoke and Labor did win again. But we do need to acknowledge, if for this election coming around, that lingering community anger that is out there. I don't know if this is going to trigger PTSD in people seeing that Daniel Andrews press conference and that kind of almost 1984 quote of "staying apart keeps us together." Daniel Andrews did speak, I think, for almost all of those days straight. So you can't say he was an absent leader like our friend ScoMo. But the trust got burned up over time. And look, I just want to cover off the stats as the reason why I was supportive initially, because if you can see there with that graph there, that the healthcare system capacity can only look after so many people. It's only set up to look after a certain amount of people in the community. And if we don't have those protective measures like masks, the vaccines, staying apart, and that's what the lockdowns were, to not spread the virus, we would overwhelm the healthcare system and so many more people would die. That's what I believe based on what we were told. And as you can see there around with the vaccines and the timing of the peak of when people get diagnosed with COVID, that if we get 90% of the community vaccinated, that R number, which is a replication of how the virus will spread. So if you can see there, if only half the population are vaccinated, it can spread at a rate of ×5. And that's, I believe, exponential. So it's not just ×5, it's to the power of 5. So hugely spreading. If we got 90% of the population vaccinated, it would start to reverse that trend and stop spreading. So look, let's see how the comment section goes on that. My personal story with Vic Labor, one of the only members who I met personally was Jenny Mikakos. And she was, at the time, I believe, the Minister for Youth or the Minister for Community Development. And I was working for a youth program. And long story short, it's not relevant, the program or anything like that, but it was a rushed disaster of a program. It was supposed to be a residential therapeutic program, but the Labor just wanted to get it out before the election, and it was a complete shambles. That job stressed me out so much, and she was there at the announcement of it. And I saw that demonstration. Like, she was perfectly pleasant interpersonally. And, my criticism of politicians is never really about who they are as people in terms of their personal style, but just that arrogance. And she resigned, if anyone remembers her face, resigned in shame during COVID because she was responsible for the hotel quarantine debacle. And one of the peak bodies of I think it was the nurses or health, recognized how she just didn't know what she was talking about, but acted like she did. And it was her way or the highway. And even Daniel Andrews ended up throwing her under the bus, and she had to resign in shame. And I'm glad she had enough shame to resign. I didn't like her. I think she was one of the worst politicians that Labor had. But I think it's a symptom of the bigger cause of Labor, of that if they're going to take that authoritarian, arrogant, our way or the highway approach, I think maybe they were able to when they had the support that they did, but I think that support is slipping back. And if we're going to, I'm going to cover the Liberals next and look at the polls. I don't know if that goodwill is still there for them to take that approach, and maybe a more, a more respectful approach and respecting the intelligence, or at least respecting the autonomy of the Victorian population. That change in tone might do them well in this last year in the run-up to the election, because otherwise they might be in big trouble. Bye, Jenny. Okay, my overall grade and prediction. So my overall grade, based on everything I just mentioned, given the fails of community safety in their tone and style and some of their successes around education and infrastructure, I am going to give the Victorian Labor Government a D. So they barely pass. The three scenarios for the election, so I'm not going to just do one prediction and then have to say that I was wrong. I'm going to say that depending on what the key issue is to voters, I think a certain party will win. So if it's an infrastructure election and the focus is on the results that Labor delivered around the tunnels, the level crossings and the roads, I think Labor will comfortably win. just because of the amount that they've delivered and still have on the way. It's something visual, tangible, people can see. It's helping reduce travel times. It's helping people in a genuine way, and they've won if it's about that. Number two, if it is a crime election, and that's why I'm not saying community safety, because this is phrased in that negative way, that where people are fearful and scared. I think the Liberal Nationals coalition wins. And I think they win quite comfortably if that's the number one issue on voters' minds. I think, again, for me, it's more so the childcare scandal, but I know for a lot of people, it's the youth crime and the knife crime and the increasing crime rates. I just saw an article. We had a principal at a school stabbed close to my area today, and it is out of control. I don't think Liberal National Coalition have the right solutions. I think they're going to be a failure on it, but I do think the public will side with them if it's a crime election, if that's the number one issue. Now, thirdly, if it's a cost of living election, and this is what I think it will be, because it's quite clear that it's the number one issue for people. I also think it kind of solves if we address it, it will go a long way to helping with reducing the crime numbers in other areas like housing and education and things like that. I think it's a genuine coin flip. I think it's a 50-50 if it's a cost of living election. The current governments always get blamed when there's a cost of living crisis. If you look at the US as an example, Joe Biden and then Kamala Harris, they got voted out because inflation was going up and up through their time in office, and they didn't really do anything to meaningfully change it. They did the same thing that our Labor government is giving small rebates and small changes around the edges, that people were seeing the cost of things rising and were not accepting that as good enough. I think the Victorian Labor Government is doing that right now, and people are not seeing it as enough. It's not meaningfully changing their costs. And I've personally just got an insurance bill that's gone up. I don't know the exact percent, but I think it's about 15%. And we're being told inflation's only going up. It's going up like 3.3%. Sure, that's the average, but the cost of so many things are going up. And people are not having it anymore. People are fed up. They're tired. They're exhausted. Their wages have gone up less. I went up 0.9%, less than 1% in the last year. Our wages are not going up, but the cost of everything is. People get fed up and they want someone to blame, and they look to who's in charge. So Victorian Labor are in big trouble if it's a cost of living election, and I think it will be. The only reason why then I think it's a coin flip and not just a shoe-in for the Liberal National Coalition, and this is a teaser for my next video, they're a disaster. You think the federal Liberal National Coalition is bad, wait till you get a load of the Victorian Liberal National Coalition. Jess Wilson has just taken power as the leader, and she seems to be, again, doing a Susan Ley thing of trying to be more moderate and appeal to a broader net of voters, and it might pay off for her. She might pull it off, but I think their cost of living solutions are terrible, maybe worse than Vic Labor, or at the very least neutral. So that's why I think we're doomed. But look, we'll see how it goes. I'm not saying either way it's going to be any of these, but those are my predictions if those turn out to be the number one issues. My name's Nathan. This is The Rightest Leftist. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Victorian Labor Government. Do you think I was accurate on some of these things? Do you think I was wildly incorrect? Was there anything I missed out? Because one thing I'm really going to do in the lead up to the election is longer, specific policy-based videos, as well as the outcomes of what's actually happened. So I'm going to do mental health, youth crime, education, healthcare funding, a whole bunch of different topics. So if there's something that you're really interested in that you think you want me to cover, please leave it in as a comment as well. And if you want to be on the show, I'm open to doing interviews with everyday Aussies. If you think you could fill up an hour of content talking about politics, please send me an email from the description and get in touch, and we can have an interview as well, because I want to hear from people. I've given my predictions and priorities for the Victorian Labor Government, but I do recognise that it's a really diverse community. We all have different opinions, and I'd love to hear from you about that. So that's all for the video today. Please like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with a friend. Come on, Gen Z people. You've got your commander-in-chief of the Gen Z army now. That's me. So let's make sure you all get a nice job, get a house. We turn around this story that you're never going to be able to afford a home. It's doable. Let's get it done. And thank you for tuning into the video. Let's keep talking again soon.